Greetings everyone, I'm Ted Perch and welcome back to In Studio, a program dedicated to the arts and artists of East Hampton and the greater Pioneer Valley. Today's guest is East Hampton artist Ruth Kjaer. Ruth has been painting for over 40 years, has traveled extensively with exhibitions around the world and across the country. Currently, selected works from her recent body of work, Slain on the Steps of the Temple of Men, Women in the Age of Violence and Oppression, are being exhibited by Violence Transformed at the Harriet Tubman House and Doric Hall in the Massachusetts State House in Boston, the D'Amour Museum of Fine Art, and the Pulse Art Space Gallery in Springfield. We'll have those dates posted at the end of the program. Guest host Allison Platt, a licensed clinical mental health counselor specializing in the trauma of abuse and neglect, recently sat with Ruth to discuss her work. During the program, photos of these works will be shown. These works are meant to invoke strong emotions and feelings, as befits the serious nature of the subject.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
So you've been painting for more than 40 years.
Yes.
You've traveled extensively. You've had exhibitions all over the world, across the U.S. And currently there's some pieces in Boston at a few different places. We'll talk about that later, as well as Springfield. And I guess some of the pieces behind us are going to be going to Springfield.
Well, to Boston. Yes, Springfield and also Boston.
Springfield and Boston. So before we get into that body of work, can you just tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to be here at a studio in East Hampton today?
It's a long story.
Okay.
But I started out as a musician, and I got my degree in music out in the Midwest. Then a family was transferred to a small town in Illinois, and I lost all my connections with music, jobs, and so forth. And so I decided to try a new venue, and I turned to the paintbrush.
What kind of music were you playing?
Pipe organ.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh. So how was the transition from music to a visual art?
Well, it seems as though it really had a lot of the same elements, just using different methods to get an emotional core, I suppose you'd say. I still find that there are a lot of connections between the two. I still enjoy music a lot. I paint to music, and I go to lots of concerts. Whenever I'm traveling, I'm going to concerts and so forth, besides tons of art museums. So both things are pretty central to my life. So then I lived in a lot of different locales in the Midwest. I grew up in California, and then my son was moving out here to UMass to teach, and so that's what brought me and my husband out here.
You said that you found when you were making the transition from music to art that there were some of the same elements. Can you say what those elements are?
Well, the emotional aspect of it, I think, is very similar. That's kind of hard to describe, but I find that the emotion that goes into a painting just relates so much to what I did do some writing in music, and I found that was a continuum there. So I think that's the most obvious thing that
The emotional
I feel.
Who were some of your influences once you started painting?
Oh, I started with rather conventional painting, doing landscapes and seascapes and cityscapes and so forth, but I branched out immediately to find new ways. I was always very curious about new forms and what was going on in art, and I found books wherever I was. I was in some small communities at first without any museums around, so I went with what I could find, and I got very wrapped up in the abstract expressionist movement. And so my work evolved into that form, and I still employ that a lot.
Did you have a particular teacher whose method of teaching you has really stuck with
I
you?
didn't really go to art school at all, but I was married to an art professor. So
Wow.
that, of course, had a big influence. Mostly my training has been through my own curiosity and study on my own.
What have been some of the challenges that you faced as a semi-self-taught, influenced by an art professor, husband, artist?
Well, the challenges go on. I'm challenged every day. Every painting is a big challenge. So, you know, my method of work has changed over the years from, I particularly worked in stain painting for a while, which means staining directly into an unprimed canvas, and so it soaks into the canvas. And then I did that for about 10 years until I finally decided I needed another change. And so I went back to a canvas that is primed and takes on texture. And so I use a variety of materials to build up canvas, and before I really start going for form in the work.
How about your process in terms of conceptualizing a piece? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, my husband and I differed on that. He really taught, or his work was very much a process of drawing out a small piece and drawing another in a similar way, but and maybe a third or fourth, and trying them in different positions and so forth. I don't work that way, and I start with a blank canvas with a little bit of an idea of where I'm going, but the canvas pretty much evolves and works and evolves as I go along. So,
do you start with a concept? Is there some idea in your mind, a theme, a thought, a feeling, or is it really you and the canvas and the brush?
both, I'd say. I've done a couple of ventures here. One is the Violence Against Women series that I've just been working on, which is, you know, pretty much focused on one topic there. And then the other one was the Image Obscured, which I developed a couple of years ago. But I've always been very interested in the women's movement of equality and so forth, which, you know, of the 60s and 70s. I followed that through all that period of time, which still is evolving. And it was just in the last year or so that really surfaced in my work.
I would like to turn now to the Women in Violence series. Officially slain on the steps of the Temple of Men.
Yes.
Women in the age of oppression and of violence and oppression.
Yeah.
So how did that originate? You were talking about your experience of the 60s and 70s, but this
Right.
particular series now, it's
Yes.
2013.
Well, we're all surrounded by violence. In fact, our society is terribly violent. And I feel that on one hand, it's an artist's really responsibility or obligation to take issues of our society and examine it. I'm thinking, you know, the violent series is been written about. There's been a lot of, like, for instance, Nicholas Kristof has written a wonderful series of articles for the New York Times about it, and also his video Half the Sky, which perhaps people have seen. Yes, and but I just felt that maybe art should take a place in this because a visual thing that really sticks in a person's mind sometimes more than just reading. So that was one of the triggers for me. Another one was that when I moved out here, my husband passed, and I met a group of women, and which expanded and expanded. It was really great. But I also found out in getting to be really close friends that so many had been violated, and I couldn't believe how prevalent that was. So the thing that I am concerned about is that our society and its violent character is so prevalent, and that it's not just in one region or area, but it's right integrated into small towns right here, plus around the world.
You've cited the contrast between increasing freedoms for women with what seems like increased violence.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, do you think it's really an increase in violence, or do you think that it's just more out there, more in the news, more people willing to share their experiences?
I'm sure it's both, you know. I'm sure that there's more out there because I think it's probably always been with us but hidden and in former days. But the statistics I have come upon say that 1 in 5 women of the world will be molested or abused somewhere.
Yeah, that's a really high percentage.
Yes, it is.
I've heard somewhere that 1 in 3 or 4 teenage girls will be violated in some way before they reach their 18th birthday.
Yeah, that's right.
That's incredibly high statistic. When you look at that, what you've called the irony between these increasing freedoms and the increasing violence, is there a way that this body of work actually portrays the irony, or is it really focused on the woman's experience?
Well, I think it can be interpreted a lot of different ways, and I have been showing the work myself in my studio to a variety of people, and everybody's response is different. I think that it is pretty specific, but it can also be looked at as a metaphor in a way. But my real goal is to make people more conscious, and also get at the emotional core of the pain and suffering that women are going through.
Right. So you said you've had a variety of responses. Is there one in particular that kind of has stayed with you?
Yeah, there is. I was showing the work to a group in my house, and one person said, left the room and said, "This is just too much for me to handle."
Wow.
So I took it as an indication that I was getting to the core of it.
I'm curious too about the cultural dynamics. I know you lived for a time in Haiti, and
Right.
I'm curious about if when you were there, you were aware of some of the violence dynamics against women and how that might compare with what you've heard from folks here.
Well, of course, that's a very poor society. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. I enjoyed immensely going there and experiencing that. In fact, we had a little house there and lived there off and on. It's been a few years, though, since I've been back. But that, I think, predominates the whole culture down there, is the fact that it's such a struggle for them just to make it through a day. So at that time, I was not conscious, I guess, of violence. It seemed like the Haitian people were truly a very sweet society. And even though they have a struggle every day just getting food, it does not seem to get them down. They're up and going with a smile on their face every day. Quite a change. I was always struck by it when I come back here and get off the plane in the airports and notice, the grim faces of everybody. So, big difference.
Yeah, there's a big contrast between that kind of ability to persist in the face of the struggle of poverty.
Yeah.
And then I was mindful of what you were talking about in terms of women living in fear every day because of how much violence there is. And how do you portray kind of that fear component?
Well, I don't know much about that. I mean, I'm just taking what is the components that I'm reading about and so forth and putting it into visual.
So it just comes through, not necessarily a conscious process in the forefront.
Yeah, I would say so.
You reference, we were talking about this earlier, you reference abstract expressionism, neo-expressionism, and early modernists as influences because of their search to portray their own feelings in relation to society. And you've said regarding the Women in Oppression series is that your hope is that you can portray the feminine emotion and spirituality. And I'm curious about your understanding of spirituality in this context. Can you say a little more about that?
Spirituality is a really deep feeling I think we all have to embrace in ourselves, and I think that spirituality takes a lot of different forms. We all have our avenues of seeking our place in the world, and how we get there is choices that each one of us make, and how we can work through our whole lives. So,
is there a particular connection that you yourself make as an artist in terms of your relationship spiritually to the work that you do?
I don't know how to describe that. It's just more in the act of doing it, I think, that I feel it.
Do you have a definition? I mean, I've heard a million definitions for spirituality, and you were talking about it's every person's own experience, but how would you define it?
I haven't thought about that. I'll have to think about that in a bit.
Okay, I'll add that to come back to this question.
Yeah.
Someone told me once that spirituality is intimate. And as I was looking at your works online and now here on the wall, certainly in the context of intimate partner violence or child abuse, there's a transgression against intimacy. So I'm thinking about this, spirituality as intimacy and then the transgression of intimacy. So what's your understanding of how violence affects spirituality? What does it do to those who experience it?
I think you'd have to ask them, not me.
Because it seems to come out,
Yeah.
That the work is expressive of that experience.
Well, having not lived through that, it's more my observance, so that's hard for me to answer.
The person who had to walk out of the room because what she was seeing was too intense for her.
It was actually a man.
It was a man. Interesting.
Yeah.
So something resonated in terms of this.
And that's what my work, I hope, will really convey, to get at people's inner feelings.
one of the things I noticed, and I'm not sure any of the pieces that I noticed this in are here, but one of the things I noticed when I was looking at these was that you seem to communicate spirituality as a resilience factor. That though you're portraying your perception of violence against women, there's also a resilience factor.
Yeah, well, that's one of the hopes I have, is that through knowledge and more this subject is resonating in our culture, that we can make change. You know, in my small way, I just hope that I can contribute to that.
You gave me a let's come back to that question earlier.
One other thing I'd like to say about that resilience is I always try to leave a little space in my paintings that they're pretty dark, some of them, as far as content, but I always try to leave some area that has a glimmer of hope, that people can pick up on.
Is there something here behind us that you think portrays that glimmer of hope?
Let's see. I think this painting is an example of that. It's a painting of a nude woman who's standing in a rather exotic natural setting. It's called We Walk in Chaos, Bound, Searching for the Light. And so you see that upper blue area that's open. And so below it is this tangle of nature, and she's in the midst of that. So it's kind of metaphorical, and that she walks in chaos, but she's searching for the light. Mm-hmm. So several of the paintings that will be on the show in Springfield will have that character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you tell us about the show in Springfield?
Yes, it'll have about 14 pieces, and it's going to be a variety of mostly large paintings, but some small ones. It's going to open on the 8th and run through May 31st. We're hoping also to have a panel discussion. It's going to have a reception on the 13th of April. And the panel discussion will probably be about a week later, on the 20th. And right now I also have a painting at the Springfield, the Demore Museum of Fine Art in Springfield. And that painting is on this series also.
Mm. The exhibition that's opening on the 8th, where is that in Springfield?
That's at Pulse.
Pulse.
And it's on Chestnut and Pearl Street. And it's open to the public.
Now you also have pieces from this collection in Boston. Can you say a little bit about where those are?
Yes. The Lesley University is sponsoring these two shows. They have different venues for the exhibition, which is called Violence Transformed. And the first one that I'm in is a piece on Mylar. I could talk to you about that.
Please do.
And that painting is at the Harriet Tubman House, and is on exhibit right now. The reception will be tomorrow, which I'm hoping to get in for. And that goes for about a month, I believe it is, or maybe 6 weeks. Then the other two paintings will be at the State House in Doric Hall, and that will open in April, the 7th, I believe it is. And there will be a reception for that also, and will run for about a month.
And those are also from this collection?
Yes.
Is that in honor of Women's History Month?
Well, the one in Springfield is this month, with March is Women's History Month. Yeah. So.
What's your routine on a daily basis if you don't have to go to Boston for an opening?
Well, it's different. You know, I sometimes am up in my pajamas working in my studio, but usually I spend about 3 to 4 hours a day painting. And sometimes when I'm really developing something, I'll spend more time, but that's about the extent of it, and then I'm exhausted.
How long have you been working on the violence against women series, Women in Fashion?
That came about just this last year.
Just the last year.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you think it's important for folks to know about your work?
Well, I just hope that they will see the work and maybe leave a comment for me. I just love getting comments from people as to their experience or how they feel about the work, and you know, whatever they have to say, I appreciate it. So I hope they'll come to the exhibitions.
Great. Well, thank you. Ruth's work is currently being exhibited in Springfield and Boston. You can find more information on her website, www.ruthkjaer, which is Ruth, KJAER.com. Thanks again, Ruth, for being with City Arts today.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's program. If you or someone you know is subject to domestic violence or sexual assault, trauma, bullying, or abuse of any sort, please reach out to friends, family, local law enforcement, social services, your church, and mental health providers in the community for help or shelter. Thanks to Ruth Kjaer for sharing her art and space, to Allison Platt for sharing her expertise on trauma, East Hampton Community Access TV Channel 5, East Hampton City Arts Plus for their support, and to you, the viewer, for joining us in today's program. We continue this journey, seeking the truest color, the bluest note, the innermost spirit, and outermost heart of our city's art. We want to hear from you with questions and comments about today's program, or if you'd like us to visit your studio. Contact information for Ruth Kjaer's exhibits is listed in the credits coming up next. So join us next time in studio.